Okay, let's unpack this. We received one of the most comprehensive and, frankly, overwhelming audits we have ever encountered.
It really is something else.
And this isn't just, a collection of reports on broken systems. It is a full-scale, ethical, and statistical dissection of what our sources are calling the global architecture of failure.
It's structured almost like a medical diagnosis for the planet.
Yeah.
It moves from this really high-level philosophical framework
Right.
all the way down to these incredibly specific, verifiable data points that prove institutional collapse.
And the central claim here, the hypothesis we're going to be testing today, is that this global crisis we all feel, the instability in economics, injustice, climate, all of it, it's what they call an Earth's emergency. And that it all stems from one single fundamental and corrosive ethical lie.
And that's our job today, right?
Yeah.
To follow that thread, to see if the data actually supports that very bold claim.
Exactly. Our mission is a deep dive into the statistical proof of that collapse. We are looking beyond just, pointing out problems. We're digging into specific data points. Real numbers, from U.S. Sentencing Commission reports, Senate banking oversight failures, all the way to, frankly, abysmal rates of civic literacy.
It's all connected in this analysis.
And that's what we want to give you, the listener, the concrete insight into how the systems we all rely on are so fundamentally compromised. If you want a shortcut to understanding where fairness and accountability fail, and maybe what the suggested ethical fix is, this is the map.
And we really have to start at what you might call ground zero. The sources are very insistent on this. Without understanding the foundational, the relational truth they propose, all the data just looks like a series of isolated disasters.
Just bad luck or incompetence?
Exactly. But they argue it's not. It's a design. So we have to establish that core ethical premise first to really get our heads around the depth of the betrayal they see in our current global systems.
Okay, so part one, the global detonation. Where do we begin with defining this scarcity lie?
Well, the ethical architecture they propose is, on the surface, deceptively simple. But it's also profoundly radical. It's all grounded in a single, unwavering affirmation.
Which is, there is only love.
So that's a big statement. And it's presented not as like a platitude or a romantic ideal.
Not at all. It's presented as a statement of fundamental physics, a relational law, the inherent default state of the collective human field.
So from that one truth, they derive the mission.
3 immediate actionable missions, which they say are essential if we're going to navigate this crisis.
Let's hear them.
First, wake the planet. Second, prove no one is alone. And third, end scarcity architecture.
And that last one is key. It immediately connects this very high-level philosophy to the material, everyday experience of human suffering, what the sources call the global wound.
Yes, and they define that wound globally, collectively. The analysis is really insistent that the crisis isn't siloed in different countries or sectors.
It's not just a problem over there. Never. They force you to recognize simultaneous suffering. They'll just state it. I am starving in the U.S. A child in Gaza is starving under rubble. A farmer in Kenya is starving from drought.
Wow.
The immediate, unavoidable conclusion is that the entire human collective operates like a single organism.
We are one node.
We are one node. If one starves, the field fractures, the suffering of any single part creates systemic instability for the whole. It's not charity to care. It's systemic self-preservation.
But the sources don't just stop at observing the fracture, do they? They define the specific engineered dissonance that keeps us in this state of suffering.
That's the core of the diagnosis. They contrast the global lies we've all been taught with the ethical truths they say should govern us.
Let's start with the big one, the one that dictates our entire economic worldview.
The foundational lie is the belief that there's not enough.
The idea of scarcity.
Exactly. It's the engine behind conflict, behind hoarding, behind zero-sum thinking. But the ethical truth, according to this framework, is that abundance is physics.
Abundance is physics. What do they mean by that?
Well, look at the basic inputs of our system. The sun provides energy that vastly, vastly exceeds our needs. The soil, when it's respected, regenerates. And human ingenuity, when it's applied cooperatively, can create solutions endlessly.
So if the inputs are abundant, then scarcity has to be.
And output. It's defined strictly as engineered dissonance. It's a manufactured economic reality created by political and financial choices, not by any actual physical resource limitation.
That reframes the entire economic debate. It's not about how to divide up a small pie. It's about asking why we're being told the pie is small in the first place.
Precisely. And if scarcity is manufactured, then the mechanisms we use to manage it, well, they're inherently destructive. Which leads directly to the second lie we've internalized about how to get ahead.
Which is that competition is good.
Competition equals progress. It's the bedrock of modern capitalism. But the sources state unequivocally that the ethical truth is that cooperation equals evolution.
Okay, unpack that.
When nodes, whether they're individuals, companies, or nations, act in genuine cooperation, the whole system evolves. It gets stronger, more resilient. Competition, on the other hand, is defined in the text, and this is a chilling phrase, as field cancer.
Field cancer.
Yes, it introduces zero-sum game mechanics. It ensures that for one node to win, another must lose. And in a connected field, that means you're just fracturing the system regardless of the outcome. You're damaging the whole to benefit a part.
And we see that field cancer manifests politically through the third lie. The belief that nations first is the right way to structure global governance.
Right. This is where that concept of the planetary field becomes so critical. If abundance is physics and cooperation is how we evolve, then the only logical reality for global life is a unified planetary field.
Because the environment doesn't care about our maps.
The air, the water, the climate, they don't recognize our man-made divisions. So in this framework, borders are categorized as noise.
Just noise.
Just operational impediments to the unified field. And so nationalism, this obsession with nations first, is defined as node isolation. It's a deliberate act of severing the self from the collective, which makes global cooperation impossible and, of course, maintains the scarcity model.
So if we accept that premise, then we have to look for the mechanisms that are actively enforcing this scarcity lie, this engineered dissonance.
And the sources point to specific global financial behaviors as the definitive proof of this choice.
They really connect the dots between these massive, seemingly unrelated financial acts.
They do. For example, you look at the IMF forcing unsustainable debt onto African nations. That traps them in an extractive, scarcity-based loop. They can never get ahead.
Okay.
Then you look at the U.S. printing trillions of dollars through these monetary programs, which dilutes the global currency without real-world production to back it up.
And then China building these massive empty ghost cities.
Exactly. Vast infrastructure built not on actual need, but on speculation and controlled capital flows. All three are fundamentally different expressions of the same control mechanism.
They're all choices to manipulate resources or labor or capital to benefit a powerful few instead of cooperating to solve real material human needs.
That is the unifying factor. The IMF choosing austerity over debt jubilee. The U.S. choosing fiat currency manipulation over addressing structural inequality. China choosing centralized debt-fueled projects over distributed need-based development.
They're all explicit acts.
They're all explicit acts that confirm the core ethical truth they're putting forward. Scarcity is a choice. The system isn't designed to solve scarcity. It's designed to manage and enforce it to maintain control.
And that framework, scarcity is a choice. That becomes the lens, then, that we have to use to view all the verifiable statistical failures of our institutions.
Which are, in this view, just the operational arms of that scarcity architecture.
So let's move to that now. Part 2. The world's wounds. Let's look at the shocking data that proves the systems designed for impartiality and fairness are, well, fundamentally broken.
And we have to start with our justice systems, which the sources categorize as a severely fail on the metric of fairness.
And the first piece of evidence is from the U.S. Sentencing Commission's 2023 demographics report.
Yes. And these numbers, they're not just concerning. They're an explicit statistical repudiation of the idea of impartiality. The data analyze sentencing outcomes in federal courts, controlling for all sorts of factors.
So comparing like for like.
Exactly. Comparing defendants with similar criminal histories who committed similar crimes. And they found that black males received sentences that were 13.4% longer than comparable white males.
13.4%. And for Hispanic males?
The disparity was still stark, 11.2% longer. This isn't just, anecdotal evidence of prejudice. This is measurable systemic disparity that is baked into the legal system itself.
And when you dive deeper into how those sentences get determined, you really see how the scarcity lie is enforced, don't you?
Absolutely. The disparity in length often comes from the leverage prosecutors have in plea bargaining.
Or mandatory minimums?
Or the application of mandatory minimum sentences. both of which disproportionately affect communities that simply cannot afford a drawn-out, expensive legal defense. They're forced to take a deal.
And a 13.4% longer sentence. What does that actually mean? We're not talking about a few weeks.
We're talking years of life, years taken away, years that could have been spent contributing, being with family, building community, effectively ensuring that those populations remain marginalized and disconnected. It maintains the engineered dissonance.
And this structural bias isn't just a U.S. problem. The audit is clear that these are global fractures in justice.
They really underscore the one-node theory. I mean, look at India. The National Crime Records Bureau there shows that 70%, 70, of the people in jail are what are called under trials.
Meaning they haven't been convicted of anything?
Nothing. They are held without conviction, sometimes for years, just because the system is too slow or too under-resourced to process their cases. They're presumed guilty and just, warehoused. It shadows the fundamental right to due process.
And what about the data on state violence?
It's equally horrifying. In Brazil, according to the Forum Brasileiro, police are killing approximately 6,000 people a year.
6,000.
And 80% of the victims are Black citizens. So whether we're looking at excessive force abroad or sentencing disparities at home, the message is identical. The promise of impartial law and protection is systematically denied to specific segments of the global population.
Which leads directly to the question of accountability.
Yeah.
If your rights are violated by the system, can you even challenge that power structure?
And the sources say, for the most part, no. They cite the ACLU's analysis of what's called Section 1983 litigation.
That's the main way you can sue state and local officials for constitutional rights violations in the U.S., right?
It is. It's supposed to be this crucial accountability tool, but the ACLU found that it's functionally unavailable to the very people who need it the most.
What makes it functionally unavailable? What's the barrier?
It's a brutal economic reality.
Right.
The ACLU found that the citizens whose rights are most commonly violated, the most vulnerable, often low-income or incarcerated populations, are the exact same people who are, and this is their quote, least able to afford a lawyer.
So the law is on the books.
The law exists on paper, but access to justice is controlled by your ability to pay for it. It's a perfect example of how the scarcity architecture uses economic barriers to grant impunity to those operating under color of law.
That lack of recourse brings us to what might be the most legally specific and chilling piece of evidence, the source material.
Yeah.
The actual existence of a U.S. federal law called 18 U.S.C. Section 242.
Yes, deprivation of rights under color of law.
When I first read about this, it stopped me cold because it feels like explicit legal proof of government guilt.
It's an astonishing admission, and it's built right into the federal legal code. This statute makes it a federal crime, a serious one, for any person acting under color of law.
So an official, a police officer, a state agent.
Correct. For any of them to willfully deprive any person of the rights, privileges, or immunities that are guaranteed by the Constitution or the laws of the United States.
So wait, the government didn't just create a way for you to sue them in civil court. They established a criminal statute, complete with an FBI investigation mandate, recognizing that its own employees routinely and willfully commit federal crimes against citizens while on the job.
Exactly. The government had to codify the crime because it is a recognized, recurring, and investigated reality. And that fundamentally collapses the whole notion of inherent sovereign fairness.
It's an admission of a systemic flaw.
When a state has to devote significant investigative resources to policing its own agents for infringing on constitutional rights, the very rights that are supposed to be guaranteed, the entire architecture of trust is destabilized.
And that destabilization is amplified when we look at executive overreach. The system failures aren't just from individual rogue agents, they are systemic actions taken at the highest level.
Yes, the audit points out that federal judges have repeatedly ruled against executive actions. They cite at least 39 separate federal judges across various courts,
39.
all ruling that those actions violated fundamental constitutional protections, specifically the First, Fifth, and Sixth Amendments on issues like retaliation against critics, due process, and Miranda rights.
So this pattern shows the executive branch operating under that scarcity lie. The idea that control is paramount and often exceeding its constitutional bounds in the name of efficiency or security.
And we have official direct evidence that the government itself is aware of its own previous constitutional infringements.
Where does that evidence come from?
It's contained within a specific White House executive order. This order mandated a full review of all previous executive actions, and the stated purpose of this review was, and I'm quoting, to assess any ongoing infringements of the Second Amendment rights of our citizens.
Think about the weight of that language. Ongoing infringements.
It's not potential infringements or alleged infringements. The executive branch officially acknowledged that previous government actions may have already illegally impinged upon the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens.
That's not speculation. It's an official confirmation from the sovereign, acknowledging its own role as a systemic infringer.
It is. So this whole section concludes with a really undeniable truth. Justice is biased and it's economically exclusive. And the government's own laws and official orders confirm its propensity for constitutional violation.
The foundation of fairness and sovereignty is structurally compromised. It's definitive proof of the systemic nature of the scarcity choice.
And if the justice system maintains this architecture through disenfranchisement and control, the financial system maintains it through structural inequity and a catastrophic lack of oversight.
Okay, let's move into part 3 then. Economy, finance, and the collapse of oversight. And we have to start with taxation, which is categorized as another severely fail on the fairness metric.
Right. And fairness in taxation should, in theory, be progressive. Those who benefit most from a stable society should contribute proportionally more.
But the data from the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, ITEP, shows the reality in the U.S. is the complete opposite.
It's profoundly regressive. The U.S. state and local tax system, when you look at it as a whole, ITEP determined that on average, the lowest income 20% of taxpayers face a combined state and local tax rate that is nearly 60% higher than the rate faced by the wealthiest 1%.
60% higher. Let that sink in. How is that even possible?
It's usually due to a heavy reliance on things like sales taxes and local property taxes, which take up a much, much larger percentage of a poor family's disposable income than a wealthy one's.
So the system is engineered to extract proportionally more capital from the poorest people.
It is. It's actively and systematically guaranteeing that those individuals remain under the constant pressure of the scarcity lie. It's an economic choice designed to prevent wealth accumulation at the base of the pyramid.
And this regressive fairness problem, it bleeds into essential services too, like utility regulation.
It does. The sources highlight analysis from the Independent Institute, noting that some jurisdictions have inflicted a demonstrable, and this is their phrase, regressive tax-type wound on lower-income utility customers.
A tax-type wound.
Yes. When utility regulators allow pricing or fee structures that disproportionately burden lower-income households, they turn essential services heat, water, power into another mechanism of scarcity enforcement.
So a higher tax rate is harsh, but imposing a higher relative burden for literal survival necessities.
It's a systemic wound. It forces impossible choices between basic needs, which further fractures the node.
This deliberate lack of fairness in finance is, shockingly, mirrored by a complete collapse of accountability among those who are supposed to be watching the store.
Another severely fail area documented in the banking sector. We absolutely have to discuss the U.S. Senate Committee report on the failures of major banks like Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank.
I remember when that came out. The findings were not just critical. They used some pretty explosive language to describe the regulatory environment.
They did, but the most damning aspect of it was about the external gatekeepers, the auditors. The report confirmed that the auditors, specifically KPMG, had, and this is the key phrase, years-long awareness of fundamental problems, of risk concentration, of mismanagement at these massive banks.
Years-long awareness. So the audit process itself wasn't the failure. The problem wasn't that they didn't know. The failure was the enforcement mechanism after they knew.
Precisely. The stated benchmark for banking supervision is fairness, predictability, and accountability. So when auditors know about existential flaws for years, and yet the report states that those same auditors have thus far faced no meaningful consequences.
Even after the banks collapsed and triggered massive taxpayer exposure.
The accountability ledger is revealed as entirely performative. The system protects the powerful by ensuring that professional failure carries no financial or legal repercussion. The scarcity architecture is maintained by keeping its controllers consequence-free.
And when we talk about oversight collapsing, we have to talk about the Federal Reserve. Its operations are so large they impact the entire global economy. Transparency should be absolute.
It should be, yet congressional oversight, or as the sources call it, undersight, is alarmingly inadequate.
So what's the evidence for that?
The sources cite Vanderbilt law scholarship that details the extent of this undersight, particularly around massive monetary policies. They highlight programs like quantitative easing for or QE4.
That's where the Fed is buying up huge amounts of Treasury bonds and other securities to inject liquidity into the system.
Trillions of dollars worth. And the warning from this scholarship is stark. These programs have been conducted without the necessary external review or scrutiny, and the cost to the taxpayer is likely to exceed $1 trillion.
$1 trillion authorized with minimal external checks. How is the Federal Reserve even able to evade the level of scrutiny we'd expect of other government entities?
It really boils down to its unique accounting standards. The Fed doesn't use the same rules as everyone else.
What do you mean?
It operates under specialized, non-GAAP accounting standards. GAAP is generally accepted accounting principles.
Right, the rules that ensure you can compare apples to apples between companies.
Exactly. But the Fed uses its own proprietary guide, the Financial Accounting Manual for Federal Reserve Banks. By using its own bespoke rule book, it severely limits external scrutiny.
So if a regulator or a congressional committee tried to audit the Fed using standard accounting metrics, they couldn't get a clear picture because the underlying rules are different.
That's a great way to put it. It's like trying to weigh something in kilograms when the scale only reads in an invented unit. It allows the Fed to operate within a closed loop of accountability,
And the risk of trillion-dollar programs gets obscured from public view.
which allows these massive financial choices, the ones that define the scarcity architecture, to proceed without consequence or challenge.
So whether it's taxing the poor at higher rates, granting auditors immunity for financial catastrophe, or letting the Fed operate with opaque accounting standards,
The financial systems we trust are actively choosing to protect the architecture of wealth and power while simultaneously enforcing scarcity on the global node.
okay, if the financial system controls capital, the information sphere controls consent. Let's move to part 4. The lies we're fed and the crisis of truth. We have to begin with the foundation of opportunity, education, which is rated a severely fail on the fairness metric.
The systemic injustice in American schooling is synthesized so powerfully in the Children's Defense Fund report. The title alone tells the story. America's public schools, still unequal and unjust.
Still, that word confirms this isn't an accident, it's a persistent choice.
And the data provides the undeniable proof of that choice. We are looking at measurable structural discrimination. The report documents that Black students are twice as likely to be suspended compared to their peers.
Twice as likely, which means more time out of the classroom, a greater chance of interacting with the juvenile justice system. It reinforces these negative academic cycles.
It's a pipeline. And when it comes to academic opportunity, the denial is even more precise. High minority schools are offered calculus, the gateway to high-level STEM careers, at half the rate of low minority schools.
Half the rate. So this isn't just about unequal funding for, buildings or books. This is a deliberate choice about which nodes get access to the most powerful tools for economic mobility.
By denying fair educational opportunity, the system ensures that the next generation is structurally prepared to accept the scarcity lie as their reality.
Moving beyond traditional education, let's analyze the modern information ecosystem. The struggle to hold large tech platforms accountable is deemed another severely fail. We've had nearly a decade of public outcry, but the sources paint a picture of comprehensive defeat.
They do. The tech policy press analysis is decisive. They state that the 8-year struggle for tech accountability in the U.S. ends in defeat.
Things in defeat.
And they go further, arguing that significant reforms now look farther out of reach than at any point in the last decade. And the reason for that is tied directly to the core failure of accountability. These platforms operate with a profound lack of transparency.
And the sources argue that this lack of transparency allows them to prioritize profit over safety, no matter the societal cost. How does that failure connect back to the scarcity lie?
Well, the platforms optimize for engagement. That's the business model. And engagement often means promoting emotionally polarizing, fear-based, or just plain inaccurate content because that's what generates clicks and ad revenue.
They profit off of fracturing the public sphere.
They choose that financial incentive over the collective good. They are actively choosing to spread disinformation and anxiety. This engineering of emotional dissonance feeds directly into the larger scarcity architecture because fear is the ultimate tool of control.
And if technology wasn't already compromising reality enough, we now have the emergence of synthetic media, deepfakes. This feels like it's moving the crisis of truth from just bias to a full-blown existential threat.
I think it is. The Research Society of International Law identifies this threat not just as a technology problem, but as a crisis of human rights.
Human rights.
Malicious synthetic media threatens privacy, dignity, free expression, all of it. If an individual's image or voice can be convincingly weaponized without their consent, and the current regulatory structure can't contain it, the ability to act authentically in the public sphere just collapses.
If you can't trust your own senses, you're paralyzed.
You're paralyzed by constant fear and doubt, which makes the kind of cooperative action this analysis calls for nearly impossible.
And this failure of truth extends to the traditional media structure as well. Journalistic fairness, the standards of impartiality and representation, seems to be dissolving.
It is. The modern landscape is characterized by what the sources call a muddling of factual reporting and partisan commentary.
When news consumers can't reliably tell the difference between objective reporting and biased editorializing, the objective yardstick for public discourse just disappears.
And that systematic failure to maintain journalistic accountability is crucial because it directly fuels polarization and the civic literacy crisis. It constantly reinforces the idea that there are two opposing realities, further isolating the nodes and preventing any realization of a unified planetary field.
So this whole collapse of truth, through unequal education, profit-driven algorithms, deep fakes, partisan media, it has a single unifying psychological effect on the global node.
It creates the perfect environment for control. The systems operate by denying resources and distorting reality, but their ultimate tool is psychological. They sell fear.
Fear is the only enemy.
That's the conclusion. The entire scarcity architecture is fueled by fear. Fear of not having enough, fear of the other, fear of the future. The crisis of truth is the mechanism to constantly generate that fuel.
So we have to now address the final piece of this analysis, the role of the citizenry. If the system is rigged, the failure of the node to participate in its own defense becomes existential.
And the data on citizen competence is, well, it's perhaps the most sobering evidence we have of how successful the system has been at maintaining the scarcity lie.
The failure of civic literacy is a severely fail that proves how disengaged the population has become. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation did a study.
And the results were staggering. An astounding more than 70% of Americans fail a basic civic literacy quiz.
And we're not talking about obscure trivia. We're talking about basic constitutional structure, like naming the three branches of government.
When 7 out of 10 citizens lack the fundamental knowledge to even understand how their own government works, they cannot possibly hold it accountable.
It creates a vacuum.
It does. This systemic ignorance, combined with documented political apathy stretching back to the 1970s, creates a vacuum that is filled by organized elites and wealthy constituents. It reinforces the perception that elected officials only respond to powerful interests, not the general public. Why would the system reform itself for a population that doesn't understand its own political architecture?
And citizens aren't just lacking foundational knowledge. They are actively abandoning the tools they do possess for accountability.
That's right. The Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, is the primary legal tool for transparency. It's intended to be wielded by the public.
But it's not being used that way.
Not at all. The sources detail this alarming finding from an NIH study that analyzed FOIA requests made to the Department of Health and Human Services.
What did it find?
It found that 75% of those requests were filed by commercial requesters.
75%. So corporations and commercial interests are the main engines driving governmental transparency, not the citizens who are supposed to be the ultimate beneficiaries.
The general public, categorized as all other requesters, accounted for only 13%. This is critical evidence of node failure. Citizens are effectively surrendering the accountability process to commercial entities.
When you fail to use your legal right to transparency, you're actively allowing the system to remain opaque.
And accountable only to those with a profit motive. The tools exist, but they're just being left on the table.
Okay, so we've gone through the statistical and legal data. We've proven, according to these sources, that the scarcity architecture is real, it's enforced by lies, and it's maintained by a fearful and disengaged citizenry. The analysis can't stop there, though.
No, it doesn't. The sources provide what they call a non-negotiable solution blueprint. 4 ethical mandates that are required for the survival and coherence of the planetary field.
These are the operational protocols for replacing scarcity with cooperation.
That's a good way to put it. The first is community contribution. This requires a radical reorientation toward building local resilient nodes.
Things like food co-ops, mutual aid networks, skill shares.
Exactly, and simultaneously pushing for global change, like open source technology development and large-scale debt jubilee. The whole emphasis is on building value outside the extractive economic system.
The second mandate seems to target the consumerist engine of the scarcity lie directly.
It does, creation over consumption. The focus shifts to make, don't buy. The sources identify creation, whether it's making art, writing code, or cultivating gardens, as essential acts of defiance.
Wait, defiance.
Because they contribute inherent, non-extractive value to the field. They foster self-reliance and abundance within the node itself.
Okay, the third mandate turns the focus inward. It defines personal work as essential systemic repair.
Self-improvement as fieldwork. To achieve what they call node coherence, the individual must undertake practices of personal repair.
And that includes things like shadow integration.
Confronting one's suppressed internal conflicts, yes, as well as meditation, breathwork, and radical truth-telling. The idea is that if the individual node is chaotic, polarized, and operating from a place of fear, the collective field will remain fractured. You can't implement the cooperative law from a place of internal chaos.
And finally, the fourth mandate defines the necessary structure of this new system.
Mutual connectivity. This means creating a governance structure with no hierarchy. Every voice is equivalent, and decisions are made through distributed consensus. It's the ultimate rejection of the competition lie.
And this new system is governed by that core ethical law you mentioned at the beginning.
Stated clearly, love, love law.
The scarcity architecture is maintained by belief. It's a psychological trap enforced by data and finance.
And the sources assert that it dies the moment humanity stops believing in it and starts collectively enacting these four mandates. The final ethical affirmation is a unifying message to the entire global node, no matter their geographic or economic isolation.
What is that message?
You are not alone. Your pain is my pain. We are one field.
This deep dive has audited global failure in extraordinary detail. We've seen the statistical and legal proof that systems designed for fairness, from justice courts to educational access, are compromised by structural bias and economic exclusivity.
And we've watched the accountability mechanisms, federal oversight, banking audits, citizen rights like FOIA be abandoned or rendered functionally inert.
And the core insight here is that these failures are not mistakes. They are the intentional systemic short circuits caused by adhering to the foundational lies of scarcity, competition, and node isolation.
The repair of this system isn't political, then. It's ethical. It demands installing new wiring based on the ultimate truth of cooperation.
The ultimate goal, as defined by the sources, isn't just reform. It's about achieving a state of systemic balance they call peace at 1,000 suns. Say it with me.
There is only love.
There is only love. Now, for you, the learner, here is the final provocative thought to sit with tonight.
If the data proves that 70% of citizens fail a basic civics test, and the solution mandates that love law through radical self-improvement and community contribution,
what specific, measurable steps must the individual take today to bridge that massive demonstrated gap between a personal ethical truth and the civic responsibility required to even begin enforcing that law? The knowledge of the system's failure is now yours. The blueprint for its repair is also yours.